But this is not for people who are completely unaware of Power BI. So if you do not know Power BI at all, there's a likelihood that some of the terms that I use and what you see on the screen may cause confusion. So in that case, this webinar is not for you. However, if you are early users and are already using Power BI, Power Query, visualizations, then I'm hoping this can be of some use to you. So without further ado, let me just jump right into it. Let's talk about what it is that we are trying to see today. We are trying to understand, and that's our key question for today. What do you do with calculations? Do you put calculations? Well, it shouldn't quite be a calculated column, but yes, what do you do with a calculation? Do you put it in Power Query or in DAX? There are two different places where you can use it. Where do you do it and why? So let's take a little example so that it makes a bit more sense. I'm sharing my screen. Let me know when you see it. I suppose you should be able to see it now. Right. So you're seeing here something. It doesn't really matter what. What's important for us is the fact that there are some measures here. Let's look at the data behind this. And yes, those who have raised hands, since you can't speak, just type out your question. Feel free to put it in chat. I'll have a look and keep responding. This is what my Power Query looks like. I have a small bunch of queries. I've connected to a folder with a big bunch of sales data from somewhere, some ancient dummy data. And I have a date table that has been created for that period of time. I have territory information. I have some product information. So these are my different queries that exist. Sorry, I will not be looking at anything other than chat. Yes, so feel free if you need to send something, drop it in chat. I'll try and keep checking it. So I'm looking now at this table. I also have a dummy table called key measures. This query is just created so that I can store all my measures there. Okay, let me come back here. I'll skip your total. Just let's focus at the data. The data shows me a name of the source. It shows me the year, month, something called a product key, an order date, ship date, customer key, a bunch of other numbers. Finally, very importantly, I have an order quantity, unit price, and so on and so forth. Now, while I'm here, what if I wish to calculate? So I have a sales amount and tax amount. I wish to calculate the sales minus tax amount. So I want the net sales, net amount, shall we call it. I have two options. Let's begin with the options that are available to me. Very simply, I can add a yes, Shailesh, those of you who've raised your hands, like I said, just drop a note in chat. My voice is low. Okay, let me see if I can do something about that. Okay, is this better? All right. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. So now coming back to where we were, I have here a net amount that I would like to calculate. So I will click on add column. I am inside Power Query. Remember that Power Query uses the M language, and on the front end, outside of Power Query inside Power BI, we use DAX. Two very different languages. So at this point, I'm trying to do a very basic custom column. Extremely simple. I will call this net amount. For some reason, all of these have no spaces, so be it. So net amount, I get this quite simply by clicking on sales amount and saying subtract tax amount from this. So it gives me sales amount minus tax amount and okay, right? So let me show this to you again. I have sales amount, I have tax amount, and I want to calculate the net amount. So I am from home in Power Query, I go to add column. I choose custom column. I give it a name and I enter my formula. So the formula I can enter from here by selecting sales amount and saying minus tax amount, or I could select from this list which is available to me. So tax amount, and I click on OK. So this gives me now each sales amount minus tax amount. And hey, let me just bung in comma type number. Oops. So now I have a number set already along with the new thing. And with this calculation, I have a net amount which is available here. This is one way of doing it. If I add this custom column, this calculation is made in Power Query and available to me directly in Power BI. All right, so this is where I go back to home and I click on close and apply. We'll wait for it to load and there we are done. We have now inside our sales, we also have something called net amount, which I can drag and drop. And there it shows me that the net amount total is 21.57. And maybe I can change this, view this by manager. So I have the data of revenue and cost by manager. And I have an overall net amount. Don't worry about the verification part at this point. We are only interested in asking the next part of this question. Should I do this that we have just seen, where I add the column inside Power Query? Or should I'm going to recreate net amount here on the DAX side. So in key measures itself, I can add a new measure. So here I'm adding a new measure in Power BI using DAX. So I will call this net space amount and say is equal to, can I just type in sales amount, let's say sales amount like that and say minus tax AMT. Does this work? It's already unhappy. It's already unhappy. It has given me an underline on sales amount and it says cannot find name sales amount. So what do I need to do here? And why does this not work? Well, I will answer the why does not work in just a bit. Let me give you a correct way. So first of all, I have sales. Sorry, I have sum of sales amount minus sum of sales. And where is that tax amount? There it is. Let me take this net amount that has got created here, bring it in, and it shows me that this is the net amount. The two are exactly the same. Yay, yippee. But this is the good part. Yes, you're right. So this is where it works only with aggregate functions. So what's the key difference? Why am I not able to get just the name of the column to work? Any thoughts? What exactly is the difference between what I did in M and what I did in DAX? Exactly. Pratik got it right. The main bit here is the fact that the level at which the calculation is done is entirely different. The reason why I need to work in Power Query directly with the rows, with the column names, is because it is working in a row level. At each row within that simple single table, a calculation functions at the row level. For each row, I add one more value. Okay. What does this mean? Let's look at it concretely inside the sales table here. So inside this table view, which I see here, I have a net amount which is calculated for every single row. It is calculated for each row and then summed up. All right. So I have a tax amount, sales amount, tax amount for sales order number SO52129, customer key 17027, shipment date 13th Feb. This row has its own individual net amount. Do you see this net space amount here anywhere? Why is that? Why am I not seeing a column for this? Because net amount, unless and until I use it here, where it is calculating it, until then, net amount remains nothing more than an empty equation. It is an empty equation in which I need to stuff the data only when I use it on the dashboard or in a calculation or in some other manner. Until then, that measure, if it is not used, is just a simple equation statement like this. That's what is a measure. Now, if I'm calculating this as just a measure, I do not have a reference of a row. Since I do not have the reference of a row, I have no option but to consider the entire table and work at the table level. That's why I need a reference to a table and then a column. Sales is my table, sales amount is my column, and the aggregation that I'm applying to it is sum. So this is where I have, yes, Anurava, you're right. In row level approach, you are needlessly loading RAM, not required while using the measure approach. Absolutely. But I will ask you to look again at the usage of needlessly. Remember this part. When a calculation is done, there are times when it is better to do it upstream than downstream. Upstream is Power Query, downstream is DAX. We'll discuss that in just a bit. If I want to do a DAX like this, it's immensely simple. I can take this DAX, I can apply any kind of filters to it. Let's see, let's look at this in a different context. I'm going to take not a customer key. Let me take a product key. Okay. Too big. Not a product key. Let me take 1 minute. Right. So I have a promotion key here. This promotion key for me, I'm looking at this as no, I do not want. Okay. So I have the promotion key, which is my y-axis, and I have my net amount in the x-axis. So it gives me 1, 2, 3, 4. It gives me 4 bars, two tiny ones which you almost don't see, and then others. Anything else that I can use? Maybe a sales territory key. Okay, let me take a sales territory key and see what that gives me. Right. This looks a little bit more usable for us right away. So as an example, I have just taken the measure here and bunked it into this chart, and it shows me immediately a split of the data. Splitting the data, Sharish, you can feel free to type your question or statement in chat, right? This is what I have done. I'm going to make a copy of this chart. I'm going to say that I want exactly the same chart with a difference of what I put inside it. Okay. So here, instead of taking net amount from here, I will take net amount from there. Again, you will find that there is no difference in display. Everything is exactly the same. At this point, and with this example, it doesn't look any different. Oh, that's all right then. It doesn't look any different whatsoever. Both seem to give me the same view, the same data, and at this tiny level, speed doesn't even matter. Why should I bother? When I have a very small amount of data, very little calculation to be done, it actually is quite easy. If I have only so many measures, I just create measures for everything, and I don't worry myself about using Power Query, saving the data, and in every single row, adding one more value. So I have 46,730 rows. And by adding one column, I'm effectively adding 46,730 new values that have to be stored. Now, I'm sorry, I will not be able to give you access to the raw data, but suffice to say, the raw data looks a little like this. This is the raw data. There is 3 years of data, and for each month, there is a file. That's the raw data. All right. So coming back here, the reason why I would not want to use Power Query here is because I can avoid storing additional data. I will calculate on the fly using only the memory without worrying about storage. Now I'm going to give you a different scenario. I'm going to give you an example, which is from the financial domain. Right. Now, this is in the financial domain. I'm looking at public data, financial data, financials, in fact, of different companies. I've taken public data, I've put it together, and I'm now comparing various ratios for and different values for different companies over a period of time. Okay. So if I'm doing something like this, let me take just give me a moment. Right. I'm taking two companies here. So I have Happiness Technologies and Tsinghua Hardware India. Both these companies give me a trend for cost of materials consumed, purchases of stock and trade. It doesn't matter. I don't expect you to know what these terms are. If you recognize them, well and good. If you don't, it doesn't matter. They're just numbers, they're values. Now, these values show me how the values are changing. That's what these charts show me over a period of time. When I'm calculating this information, the kind of measures that I have here are many. As you can see, just the list of measures is this long. All right. So those of you who are seeing files with a lot of calculations, you will realize that over a period of time, measures are fantastic because if I want to calculate something, I can do calculate some base filter, apply filters. I can take uh, changes. I have a variety of calculations dividing one with another. The divide is an important function to mention here. When I'm working with Power Query is great. It allows row level calculations, but it does not handle errors as well as DAX. DAX is richer in that sense because when I use a divide function, it gives me the capability of also saying that where if I divide A by B, I don't get something like infinity. It can manage that. I can say that just ensure that whenever there is a problem, you default to zero. Just give me a zero. Don't give me some other value. I am using the free version of Power BI. I'm not using the paid subscription at this moment so that all of you are able to see exactly what you would see if you were to use Power Query, Power BI. So my Power BI is the free version and it is created as such. All of this has been created using only this free version. So with this, and it's the latest version, otherwise it would be giving me that update, that the fact that I need to update, it would give me a message. Now, when I'm working with this data, there is a little bit of a problem that I have. Let me show you what this problem is. Right. I have here some items that need me to calculate not the current year's value, but the previous year's value. I can achieve that in DAX, but it's quite cumbersome. If I want to see the change from the previous year, which is a simple enough subtraction, I have this year's value, I have last year's value, I subtract and I see what the change is. This change, achieving this within the data at the row level is something that is complex. It's still doable in DAX, but it's complex. This is where I have an option. I use Power Query. So I go back to transform data and give me a moment. Let me see where I have. Okay, so it's not easy here either, but it's simpler. And once it's done, it's done. I don't need to worry about it. I have created an index. I will not go too much into detail into how I've done this because I do not know if all of you are at the same level, but I've added an index. I have merged queries. I have created the loop, so that within the same data, it shows me for this year one. So this is year one, year two. Okay. One of the values called assets, one of the values. And it shows me that for index one, the index two is two. So if my first year is one, this is two. And therefore, on that basis, I calculate values. So I have calculated the change from previous year by saying each value minus previous year value. This kind of a calculation, which tends to be complex in DAX, can sometimes be simpler to create in Power Query. What's the advantage that I have in working with data like this? It allows me to create quickly a very large number of calculations using DAX. Why am I doing this? Because this information of change from previous year, I need to do the same calculation for multiple different measures. Since I have to create a very large number, it is simpler for me to create one single at the back end in Power Query, a change from previous year by calculating the previous year value and displaying the difference, and then using that difference here in a variety of calculations. So wherever I need to see the difference between a previous year and a this year, I can there. So this shows me calculate sum of previous year value for particulars wherever it is working capital. So this format of saving data gives me an advantage of shortening my DAX code at the front end. So if anything you can do, let me put this down now. Why DAX? Let's start with that. DAX does not add values to the table. It only calculates on the fly when required. So those of you who've raised hands, if you haven't raised them by error, of course, feel free to enter your questions or responses in chat. Whatever your statements, you can put in chat. What does this do? It saves storage, but it takes up memory. That's the difference. It takes up memory. Now, Himanshu, I will show you again the PY calculation in Power BI Editor in just a bit. Why would I go with, oops, YM? I will say only where it saves time and code in DAX. This is the big difference between the two. Now let's go back and have a look at what we have done. When I look at previous year value, I'll take you a step back. I have sorted all of the data by year number. I have added, or let me show you the advanced editor that can also help. For those of you not used to reading the advanced editor, anybody here who is not familiar with reading the advanced editor? Okay. So if you're not familiar with it, think of it as steps. All of you have seen probably, let me open something new. I will show you how to read Power Query Editor very easily. Okay, I'm going to draw now set of boxes. Blah, blah, and blah. Right. This is what we call life. Anybody here who doesn't do this? I'll be surprised. Well, you may have different orders, of course. Some of you may wake up and, I don't know, maybe light up a cigarette or drink a cup of coffee. I don't know. But if you consider this, this is what we call a process. I have a step one, then I do a step two, a step three, and step four. All clear so far? This is just a bunch of steps. When we are using these bunch of steps, these steps we see on the side in applied steps. How did I get here? There was a question on how I got here. I clicked on transform data. In Power Query, I clicked on transform data, that opened Power Query. So in Power Query, I can see these applied steps, one, two, three. Now, hunting through these applied steps to see what is where exactly is a little difficult to do in this view. You see, I have to click on replace value, then it shows me the text here. Oh, I say, no, this is not what I'm looking for. Is this it? Oops, not this either. How about this? Yes, that's the one I was looking for. So if you want to know the detail, to understand the detail, ah, Sayali, you have an excellent question. I will address that in just a bit. Let me just close this point I'm making here. With the advanced editor, it is the same steps that you see here. One, two, three. So starting with two, this is the fun part. One is not one. Two is one in this case. So you ignore the let, and this is where your steps start. So each of these is an independent step. You see this big gap from 8 to 9 and from 10 to 11? That's because the step has a lot of code inside. Rules. Think of this not as code, but as rules. We are providing the rules to the system using the front end, and that's what you get to see here. So if I want to understand where I have added different things, let me find that index here, index. So I have an index year number. Then I have a reporting period on which I have taken date and fiscal year. Then I have come back, I have recreated by adding another index. It's a bit complex for everyone to understand, but for those who do understand, you can take a screenshot of this. Let me hold it in place for you there. You can take a screenshot this and try it out. It's not like it's rocket science. You will be able to crack it. And I say this with all the confidence of someone who still is not comfortable with code. Even though I've been writing all of this, it's not like I'm great at code, but conceptually, this is easy enough to do. Try it out. That screenshot, if you've taken it, then it should help you. All right. So coming back to that question of Sayalis as to if M helps me save time and code in DAX, why should I use DAX at all? Well, in reality, I prefer DAX at most times because DAX gives me the capability of just writing out the formulae and filling in the data and calculating only when required. When I don't need it, it doesn't need to do anything with it. Whereas if I add it here, it adds at the row level. A lot of extra data gets created. Like I mentioned in this particular example, the number of rows is 46,000. Oh, well, not in this one. Sorry. Where is the other one? Ah, in this example, I have 46,730 rows. And I have just by adding this net amount added that many extra values inside this data, increasing the file size, plus making it heavier overall for calculations, because now it has to do all of this. DAX, what the same DAX does is instead of going row by row and then working at the row level, this takes the sum. Where is it? Is it this one? Net amount. Yes. So net amount first calculates the sum of the entire column, top to bottom. Then the sum of the entire tax amount column and subtracts one from the other. After this, if I want to apply any filters by, for example, I want Govinda. So if I click on Govinda, it now filters and shows me those values highlighted. The same thing when done with M takes just that little bit extra of storage. But the bigger thing that I have and the bigger deal that I can do with DAX that I can't think of doing with Power Query easily enough is taking a bunch of different filtered values from that table and summing them up. For example, let's do something very easy. You see here Govinda. I clicked here Govinda and Govinda has been filtered here. What has happened to the table? The table itself is untouched. Nothing has happened to the table. Now, if I were to try and do this inside Power Query using M, where I don't want people to see anything other than Govinda, then yes, it makes sense for me to go into the Power Query. I apply a hard filter here on, I think, territory. And my manager, I say Govinda. Okay. Inside Power Query, I am limiting the data. Close and apply. At this point, my entire data, as you can see, so if I, right, if I look at my data, this data table has not changed. But the fact that I can now only look at manager Govinda. I don't have any other options available to me here. This is where M comes in handy because I want to force the limitation of data. I want to reduce the data here. Now, some of you will ask me the question, why don't I just remove the data? In transform data, I have still the capability in this filtered rows. If I go back to the settings, oh, not this one, territory. I go back to my filtered rows and I say not equals Govinda alone or equals Amitabh. Now my data has grown. If I were to delete the data altogether and not even pull it into Power BI, it would be a bit of a hassle trying to bring Amitabh into the picture. I would be stuck with Govinda. At this point, I can say remove Amitabh. Let's take Nagarjuna. Or I maintain complete flexibility. I clear the filter. I come back and I get to see all of the data. The reason why I would put a calculated measure here is because it gives me a lot more flexibility. DAX will allow me to switch around my filters easily, whereas every time I go into Power Query, I click on transform data, I make changes here, I have to click on close and apply. This seems easy for us as people who are authoring reports. Can you imagine the chaos for somebody who is viewing the report who has no access to Power Query? So, coming back to our question of why DAX? Because it does not add values to the table. So, I come back to this question, why would I use M at all for calculations? There are situations where I need data which is extremely difficult to calculate using DAX. That's where I will go with Power Query. In the early days of Power BI, most people only used DAX. But today you can see that as M has improved, there are more and more complex calculations that are also being done in M. At the same time, that flexibility that you get from DAX, you will not get in M. Exactly. Every time we update even a small change, it goes, the entire data is refreshed. This is where if you make a change in Power Query, everything has to be reprocessed. If you want to avoid that, use DAX. DAX does not require all of the data to be refreshed. It's a very big plus. If I were to try and create in this example all of these measures inside Power Query, I can tell you that I have actually even done that. And when I did that, the system had all of the data. It was still very fast. It was excellent in every single way, except one. When I have to calculate averages, think of this. You're calculating averages. Can I take an average of an average? Simple answer is no. But if I have already calculated an average and stored it in Power Query, M is the one that has done the average calculation. And then I come here and I try and take a fresh average. All my data is going to be wrong. So think of it this way. I have a number that has to be divided. So DAX is best for any kind of average. Okay, I have a question here. How can we append two tables from folder and we automatically updated using ETL? Well, ETL is just a connection here. We don't have a complex mechanism. If you want to take two tables from the folders, it's relatively simple. You can just do get data, connect the two. So bring in both the tables. So get data, select first one table, bring it in. Select the second table, bring it in. Once you bring it in, you can create in model view a linkage between the different tables. I don't need it in this data, but I do believe I have that in the other one here. I have a model. I have a list of territory information. I have a list of sales. All of these, unfortunately, are only IDs. Whereas here I have the names. I'm linking the two so that I don't have to say uh, sales territory key XYZ. No, there's a name to it. This is the name. Let me show you an example of what I'm saying. Let's take a sales territory key, right? I have a sales territory key and I have net amount. Okay. So for some reason, it has decided that it should be a line chart, which of course is rubbish because this is not a trend. So these should be at the very least a bar chart. So this is my bar chart. I have a bar for each of these values, right? So, however, I'm seeing that, okay, I have 4 million for sales territory key 4. Does that make sense to me? Probably yes. If this is something that I do day in, day out, I know the numbers, I'm very familiar with them. But wouldn't it be nicer if I were to have the territory name? Let's dunk this. I have a territory name, and this shows me territory west, southwest, export, etc. So I can see values for the southwest, not number 4. Right. Coming back to our quandary on DAX in or M, you can see this list growing for DAX. The number of advantages that it offers have now grown. There is a much larger set of advantages for DAX than this. The simplest being that you can actually understand what is going wrong using DAX in a much better manner. Let me show you how. So let's say that I am here and I'm calculating the change year on year. I'm calculating the change year on year. I will add this data in here. Let me switch out net amount and instead get change year on year. And I need year as well. Oh, what happened to my change year on year? Give me a moment. Did I do something wrong? Okay, it needed context. And here I want this to be a trend, which I will add. This is the problem. I have selected a year. That's why. Okay, X. I need to check. It's been some time since I looked at this sample, but well, my year on year. Let me take something simpler. Do I have something else with variables? Nope. Okay. I will walk you through the steps how to do it, though I won't be able to show you exactly. Before that, I see a question. If you have per order date-wise salesperson commission, sales value, salesperson commission, sales value, and another table, salesperson monthly sales target. What should we use, DAX or measure? Oh, measure. So to calculate year on year, I always say you need to use, you cannot do directly here. You will use in M, you will create next to the current year's, you will add the previous year's value. And in DAX, you will do the rest to make it simple and quick. Like you see here, I'm calculating current year value by saying calculate the quantity, filter the date key year is equal to selected value, year total year. So this remains the date key year. I'm taking for current year and previous year. This is year minus one. You don't need a join, but if you do want to join, you have two options. Inside M, you can use merge, or you can create a model in model view by connecting the keys. So here I am calculating in step one, current year, step two, previous year, and then I'm doing a calculation, divide CY minus PY, divide by PY. And this is where I can decide, I want to check if CY is working. So I say CY and I enter CY. Let me come back and show you, even if that data doesn't look great, it's perfectly all right. Let me bring in change year on year. Okay. Don't worry about the values themselves. Let's say I'm testing this here. So change year on year. My CY value has been calculated and it is displaying here. I want to check what my PY value looks like. So I say return PY. So now this calculates PY and shows me the PY value. So I'm using DAX to debug, to understand where my calculations have gone wrong. Now my option is to say, finally, let me see change, calculate. Now it tells me this is the change year on year, and which has been calculated by, I can see what the CY value is, I can see what the PY value is, and Now, right. So for Kamal, I have a year-on-year value change. What was the CY? This is the CY. This is just to test, to see that my formula is working. This is immensely simple right here. Using variables, and which means steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, and return whichever one I want. I can understand how my formula is functioning. For all of you, yes, you will have access to the recording. You can always revisit this. And of course, if you wish to learn more and understand more about this, feel free to reach out to SkillUpRight. That's exactly what we are here for. Suffice to say, every time you look at data, you have to understand what you're going to do with the data. To understand how to use the data, there are some technical issues like the one we discussed in today's webinar, which is where to put a calculation. So the big winner is DAX, yes, but M has its own advantages, and M will provide you a lot of flexibility in certain cases because it will allow your DAX code to be easier. So if you can do some part of the pre-calculation and keep it handy there, then it comes in useful when you are using DAX. How to use AI in Power BI? That's an excellent question and a great topic for a future webinar. I see that we have a minute left, so I don't really have, unfortunately, the ability to address that question now. But if you have anything on today's session, then yes, you will have access to the recordings. If you've signed up for this, then I think you will automatically receive a link to the recordings. Besides that, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, the YouTube channel. Just look up SkillUpRight, you'll find us there. Well, thank you all. And I hope that you were able to take something away to use in your projects and hope to see you again soon. Bye bye.